Welcome to this session on open museums. And in this session, I will expect a lot of discussion at the end of a few presentations to stimulate a little bit of our thoughts and our imagination, and also our hopes and our concerns when it comes to the web and museums and what means open museums. For the moment, in terms of speakers, we have Mrs. Now Hayashi from UNESCO and Professor Bimbo from the University of Florence. We would like to go for first kind of an overview of the perspectives and what is coming up in terms of the technology trends, and also in terms of a few projects that illustrate these trends. And we would finish with an overview of the changing role of museums and what this means for our institutions and what this means for our publics. And so let me just introduce briefly. First of all, I asked my presenters to introduce themselves when they come up here. Let me start by giving the example and introduce myself. I'm Antonio Costa. I come here from ECSITE, which is the European network of science centers and museums and science museums. So it is quite exciting for me to be here for several reasons. First of all, because I know basically very few people in here, so it's interesting to know new people, but it's also interesting to see that there are two worlds here that are still pretty much in need of connecting themselves. I'm talking about science museums and cultural-oriented museums, and this is a discussion that we have been having in the science museum field for a long time, is the need to enlarge the concept of culture. So I would like just to set up a few questions and a few topics that we might want to address then both during the presentations and at the end of the talks for the discussion. And when we're talking about this discussion about web and the museums, well, first of all, as we all know, times are changing. And when I started working in the field of museums 15 years ago, there was still a lot of discussion about old-style museums and museums that are stuffed with dusty things behind closed doors. Now, I think that we all agree that this topic of discussion is in itself a nice museum piece, because we have moved quite a long way from this concept of museums. But when we talk about web, and even coming from a field, as I do, where we have a lot of technology-engaged museums and a lot of technology people working on this, there are quite a few reluctant people and quite some fears in this. So let me just put a few things, launch a few ideas that we can go then again in the end. That, for instance, we all know that the web is really powerful in reaching to different audiences. And we're not talking just about outreach and getting to different audiences within our constituency, but actually reaching out to different parts of the world. I mean, coming here from Portugal is always interesting to be able to go and look beforehand at what's in a museum, at what's in a city, and be able to kind of test and see what I'm interested in doing. Or, most of the cases, if you're not able to go to places, at least you can bring the places to you. Connecting different cultures is also a very interesting thing. I'm currently, for instance, engaged in working with a project in Africa, and it's going to be one of the first exciting things that is only possible because of the web, which is and the social media and all that these technologies, which is to relate and to work with a completely different cultural perspective different cultural traditions, different types of instruments and of objects and of social realities. Another thing, for instance, is seeing impossible, things that would otherwise be impossible to see. There are quite a few number of items, of places that cannot be touched, displayed, manipulated, or even seen by people, and that can be made available by the use of the web. The other thing, and if you were here in this room in the previous session, you might actually see that and notice that one of the things is that it is possible to kind of turn everything into a museum. That is, extend the kind of visit, the kind of engagement with your surroundings the same way you do in a museum, with a guided visit, with information, additional information to what you just see. And I'm not only talking, we have been listening, in the previous session here, we have been listening to cities and buildings and, establishing your own trajectory in a city such as Florence to visit the city. But we can go further than that. And for instance, even if you're just hiking in the middle of nature, and coming from the science museum field, that's what I'm saying this, even if you're just walking in the wilderness, walking in a natural park and seeing the mountains or vegetation, it is quite interesting to be able to look at that and look at the geology and look at the formations and look at the plants and look at the animals exactly in the same way that you do in a natural history museum, for instance, and having the additional information about everything that concerns the environment and the natural world. Obviously, another possible thing is also to actually, if you are in a museum, most of the times you will see objects that have been displaced from their natural position. This is something that, fortunately, here in Italy, you see a lot of the paintings in the original position that they were meant to, like the ones that we see in this room and the statues. But in many other museums, for instance, in the British Museum, you will see a lot of objects that actually belong to somewhere else. And it might be interesting to use these new technologies to actually put the objects into context and show where they are from and exactly what they looked like when they were in that particular wall or in that particular church or in that particular house. But there are problems, obviously, and there are fears and everything. And some of them are, for instance, when we give these instruments to visitors at the same time, and there was just a question also in the session before about the kind of privacy. Are you looking into the visitors' tendencies when they visit the places? Are you looking at what they are looking at? Do you extract information from visitors? So there is this privacy issue from the visitors when we use this iPhone's technology or any kind of these technologies that peers into the visitor. There is also IPR, intellectual property rights, from the part of museums themselves and exhibitors. If you design an exhibit, it may be, if it is widely accessed, it may be copied and you're not very sure that you're able to preserve your intellectual property rights. So free access and open access is something that we all see as very beneficial, but there are a few problems regarding with that. Then there is this kind of thing about emptying museums of visitors, which is something that you hear a lot of people saying is that if we put everything accessible on the web, we'll have less people visiting. Now, I mean, we're very much working on this. A lot of people that really work in reality, they'll know that this is not true, quite the opposite. It's an excellent way of advertising is to, and bringing visitors to our museums is to actually put things on the web. Obviously, this has to be considered and studied. Then there is the value of reality, and this is a discussion that I've been hearing often, is that there is nothing like the object itself, and the web is kind of spoiling it. I'm obviously being a little bit exaggerating, but there are quite a few people that say this. Now, all this kind of setting up what is the inevitable developments in the web and the trends. The shifting role of museums. This is all very a balance, and that we need to tackle and we need to discuss beforehand. I would not say cautiously, I would say enthusiastically going forth, but at the same time promoting discussion before we do something that we might regret, or don't, principally that we don't do things that we're really enthusiastic for and that we should be doing. So without further ado, I would invite Professor Bimbo to start with a presentation, with this presentation.